Hey guys, Clive here, and today we're going to be covering how to detect different damage sources for PvP purposes. You could do this on PvE as well. It works. You might just have to reverse engineer it a little bit, but I'm going to be showing you how to use the hit detection data pack that I put together and kind of modify that to detect damage sources so that I can detect, say, if a player hits another player with a fireball, or if a player hits another player with a sword, or if a player hits another player with an arrow. So those kind of small details might be necessary to yours. And you can also kind of further diversify this to detect if a player hits another player with a fireball and that fireball was generated by a player who is using a very certain ability. I'm not going to get too deep into what I'm working on right now. But you can probably guess kind of what it is. But if you, let's say I have an ability that shoots a fireball or shoots an arrow, but I have another ability that also shoots a fireball or shoots an arrow, it's going to be important to know the difference between one type of ability and the other. So that is important to know. Now, one thing to also know is that when it comes to specifically fireballs, it's not going to be possible to detect with explosion radiuses, radii, only direct impact. And that's because the way the game works is if a player gets hit by an explosion like that, where it did not actually hit me, the game will not know, based on advancements, anything about the source of that damage or where that damage came from, even if there is somebody who owns the fireball who created the explosion, because there's no entity when an explosion deals damage to go back to and route your way back to the creator. So in order to deal kind of an AoE type damage, you can't use this system, and what I actually use is something similar to my snowball riding data pack, except I use a marker instead of an area effect cloud, but it's basically the same thing as my snowball riding data pack. So I essentially make an entity ride on top of it and then detect when it's no longer riding and then hit anything nearby. So the first thing you're going to need is the entity hit data pack, which I have provided in the description for you. It's a very basic data pack, but also very powerful and also very inefficient. Well, it's not inefficient at what it does, it just costs a lot to do what it does, because what it's doing is pretty incredible in terms of complexity. So essentially we have a couple things. So we have some loading and tick functions, then we also have an advancement with on hit, on hurt, okay? We also have functions, and we also have tags with entity types called targets. Targets are things that you're going to detect for hits between. And this is actually important to specify based on your project, because you want to minimize the amount of times that this advancement is successful to reduce the amount of commands that it eats up. So for us, you want to change it to very specific things. In my case, you want to change it to player, and you also want to change it to fireball, okay? And this will only track the successes for fireballs and players. So then the next thing you need to do is you need to know that this data pack is kind of excessive in what it does. It has on hurt and it has on hit. Both of them are not necessary. So you want to use only one of the two. So the only one you need is on hurt, and the reason for that is when something gets hit by something, then you got to go figure out who hit me, if that makes sense. I think you can also use on hit to go figure out who did you hit, but it's a little bit more ambiguous, because if you do that order, then you're already starting at the player, so you won't be able to find the fireball. So you pretty much need to use on hurt, which is, I believe, the special one that I added to the NPHPH whatever. So it's missing one condition, which is triggering on the target being false. But that's okay, because we don't care if we only want it to trigger when the target is true anyways. So you come down here, you see that the reward function is reward 1, and that means that you can get rid of this guy, and you can go into the functions and you can get rid of anything that doesn't have a 1 after it and also has something that's named the same thing. You can also get rid of on hit. So you wouldn't get rid of real tick, you wouldn't get rid of tick, because they don't have something that also is named real tick 1. So just anything that doesn't have a 1 with it. I know I could have made it more organized by having a hit folder and a hurt folder, and maybe I will do that and update the pack, but for now, that's what you got to do. So then when you come into reward is what you do to check certain things. So what this function is going to do is, if you hit a target, which technically this check doesn't actually matter. So I'm just going to get rid of it anyways, because you won't be able to check if the target is false. But this will look for the original entity that dealt the hurting, and this removes the advancement. So if we go into find entity, that is just a thing that you don't want to touch because it'll just figure out who the entity is based on conditions. And then if you go into on hurt, this will do say hit me. So it will say fireball hit me, like in the chat, if a fireball hits you. And it actually does a path to the original owner. So it'll say Cloud hit me. Okay. It won't say fireball. So if the fireball has an owner that is Cloud, it'll say Cloud hit me. And that's one thing that will be important here, is that when you spawn the fireball, you do data modify entity, the fireball's UU owner set from @s UUID. When you fire the fireball, make sure you copy the UUID of the owner to it so that it knows that it's your fireball, so that when you run this hit me, it'll say your name, the name of the original player hit me. And this is going to be a little annoying because you can really only test this on multiplayer if you're intending it for a multiplayer game. But this will not work for non-player entities, is just something that I want to clarify here. This will only work for PvP. I don't know if you can do this for non-player entities, so that's just something you'll have to explore yourself with this data pack. I just wanted to kind of show you guys how to use this data pack in an interesting way. So anyways, how do we specify which one it is? So we're in here, right? This will do, well, at this command, you will have the person that got hit, and at this level, you will have the person that dealt the damage, or at least the deep level of the owner, like the direct owner. But how do we know if the thing that hit them was a fireball? Well, that's a good question. So we actually have to add that into here, into the criteria, to basically just give some more criteria that can trigger regardless. So inside here, we're going to add basically a new criteria. So you could copy this one here, or you could just start typing out your own. But essentially what you need to make for the fireball is make a new criteria called isFireball. And you could put this under, you probably want to put this under target or somewhere. So we go to the fireball, and it is triggered when the entity hurts the player, just like all these other ones. And then the conditions for whether this is true will be checking if the damage source entity, which would go to the player because it is the damage source entity is whoever owns it. So if there is no player that owns it, then it's just going to be the source entity as the fireball. If there is a player that owns it, then it is the player. Now, in this case, I actually added this tag to the fireball itself because fireball is supposed to deal a set amount of damage regardless of who owns it. The only difference here is you can use who owns it to make sure that you don't hurt yourself. But this will trigger for whether it's owned or not in my case, but in your case it might be different. So essentially, if the player who owns the fireball has a tag of using this specific ability, so you could have two of these. So you could have fireball, and you could have something like epic fireball, right? Or like a fireball that does more damage or is like slower, I don't know. And you could just change this tag to like epic fireball. And these ones would trigger differently. Okay, just keep that in mind. So the tag actually makes sure that you have this specific ability. And then I just add this type equals projectile. This is actually not really necessary. It's just added code. You don't technically need it. But anyways, the point is what it's doing is it's going to the original owner of it and checking what tag they have. And if their tag is having the ability, and this is assuming that you can't really switch abilities in between. Now, this is kind of a caveat again of the system, or a limitation in the sense that you can only check if they are able to use a finite number of abilities, or you're assuming that the ability is going to be used before, or hit something before they use another ability or change abilities. You can always work with this however you want, but this is just how you check the MBT. Okay, so now that we know that the entity that is hitting them has a certain tag, right? Then we just need one more thing, and we have to add it to the conditions. And we just add it here. That way this thing will trigger if the either condition is true, but the important thing is not that it will trigger if either condition is true. The important thing is that it will just add something we can test. Okay, so I just throw it in there, right? All right, so one thing that you do have to add, and I forgot to add this, is you have to add damage into the damage criteria, you have to add the type of the direct entity, which is the thing dealing the damage, is a fireball. And this is important. For my case, I didn't include that just because I have a hierarchy. So if it can't detect something else, then it just assumes it was a melee damage type, but you may not have that kind of hierarchy system. So if you want to specifically know if it was a fireball, you have to check if it is a fireball, the direct entity. And the source entity refers to the player, direct entity refers to the entity that hit them. Then back inside here, we can go execute if entity as, and this is where I can go back, get this back, right? This is something I actually need, kind of. So you check if the advancement, and then you check the criteria of the advancement, and you see is fireball. If is fireball is true, run say hit by fireball. Okay. So then essentially this will go to the player if you need to do anything with the specific player. This will allow you to do stuff with the person who hit them if you want to like to give them a +1 kill, because if you know that they were hit by a fireball, and then you can do some math beforehand because you know how much damage a fireball is supposed to do and you know how much health the player has, so you can figure out, hey, did I kill them? Okay, I killed them. Then inside here you could give them +1 for the kill if you wanted to do something like that. And now I guess my video is demonetized for that. Anyways, so that is pretty much everything I wanted to show you guys. Now I'll just show you kind of a proof of it working on a server. I'll try and get somebody in there to test it with me. So now if you're on a server and you have the test data pack going and you have something that spawns a fireball that has your UUID, well, first I'll hit him and it says hit me, Cloudwolf hit me. But if I hit him with fireball, it says node hit by fireball, Cloudwolf hit me. So you can kind of see that distinction. It's able to discern whether it's melee or it's fireball. All right, guys, so that's it for this video. Maybe it was a little sloppier than my regular videos, but that's because I haven't done a video that does tutorials in like a month. If you have any tutorials that you specifically want to see, let me know. I will try to get to them. But just kind of a big picture, if you made it this far, is essentially with this data pack, which I will include a version of it in the description just because there were so many kind of little minor changes I had to do. I'll include what we worked on today in the description. But this data pack lets you detect in PvP scenarios whether a player was hit with melee or if they, well, I guess nothing or no specific thing, or if they were hit specifically with a fireball. And you can extend this to if they were specifically hit with an arrow, and you can also add some other specifiers using that MBT to detect if they were specifically hit with somebody who is using a fireball of a certain type based on the MBT tags. So if you thought that was useful, please leave a like, let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you next time. Peace.